So you mentioned spiritual awakening, and you also talked about mental health. And I'm intrigued as to what a spiritual awakening is and what that how that links in with that mental health, because it's one of those things, isn't it, that the way we think about mental health is quite cultural. And a lot of people would poo-poo a lot of spiritual experiences as mental health problems.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in how you've described both of those sort of around the same time. So what tell me more.
I will tell you. This is a big thing for me. If you're interested, if people are interested in this, I do a lot of, we'll put all the links for people to follow us and stuff. I write about this a lot and it's very controversial. I always get quite a lot of backlash and I have learned to manage that. And actually that's been part of my healing and the process I've gone through, because everything that I talk about is just from my lived experience, and I don't expect that everyone has to like believe or agree. But what's really interesting for me is I am an investigator, and everything I have done. So people like to poo-poo and dismiss certain things, like say as if you, and I hate the words people use around it. I feel quite strongly about it, like links with this way that we're mentally controlled, like, oh, you're crazy and you have these experiences and you're losing your grip on reality. I'm like, we don't even know what reality is. Explain what consciousness is, please. They don't know. But I've had a lot of life experience. I haven't had like a simple life experience, put it that way. And every experience I have investigated, because for me, I really did think at one point I was going crazy. Like you really, like I was really questioning my sanity, and I had to really spend a lot of time, like I say, diving into subjects. And that includes a lot of like psychology, which is like all over the internet at the minute. There's a lot of like, it's a lot more common now. Pathology, which is labeling people as disordered and given these, we'll call them, I don't even like using it, mental health conditions, labels. There's actually, when you look into it, and people can research this themselves, there's very little evidence of any mental health disorders. It's all theory. Pathology is all theory. And when you trace back that theory, actually the foundations are pretty horrific. They used to give people lobotomies and they used to abuse, especially women, a lot for being women and being emotional and saying they're crazy. And you can, like, all this stuff is just part of our history. And so I've done a lot of research on it, and all my experiences are my experience, and I've had to learn how to decipher different aspects of reality and consciousness. So what happened for me was, and the reason what I've learned now is, for me, mental health can get a lot tangled into our emotional lives and our emotional lives. So for me, emotions are linked with, it's the language of our spirit. It's a language that is non-tangible. Although we feel it physically, it does have a link with mental health, but it can't really be explained. Like, you can't really explain, you can try with scientific terms, but a lot of things happen, and it's more context, and it's very complex. Anyway, I'm going off on one a little bit. So my past was, I had my spiritual awakening when I was going through a really difficult time. I had a lot of trauma. I used to live in London, and I actually, well, attempted suicide, but I actually think I died. I don't know, but what happened was I attempted suicide, if you like, and I woke up days later as a different person. That's all I can see. And what I understand it as now, it's like I had this download, like I came back into consciousness just from a different perspective, a different level of consciousness. And like, you can ask people, like, I call it my past life. I am now integrating it a lot more. So just where I am in my life, in my healing journey now, is I am integrating a lot of that older stuff, that particular, especially that phase that went up to this. So, I mean, obviously, my suicide attempt was a mental health crisis, if you like. But the crisis, and this again is a bit controversial, the crisis wasn't that I was thinking badly. The crisis was I was living in a version of hell that was so horrible. I didn't even want to live there. I didn't want it. It was done. I was absolutely done. And it was actually one of the, which again, people don't like to hear, but it was one of the most empowering decisions I've ever made. I thought, right, that's it, I'm done. Done. Nah, this is not for me. Don't want to live in this reality anymore. And I did what I did. And and actually, when I did it, I prayed for the first time that I had ever prayed for a long time since I was a kid, which has also got another story linked to old trauma. But anyway, I prayed and I was like, well, if I survive this, which I shouldn't have survived, if you ask a medical professional, I should not have survived, but I did. And I said, if I survive this, I want a better life. And then when I came around, I was not the same. And I had to unpack it and I completely changed. So at that time, I was an addict, a functional addict, if you like. I had a really cool job as a photographer and stuff in London. I was working in the media industry, but every single day I was drinking too much. I was smoking weed. My food was terrible. Like, you know what I mean? I was just living this half life and I was getting involved with the wrong people and I was seeing things I didn't want to see. And there was like all sorts of stuff going on. Like I did have some pretty serious trauma at that time as well. And that's all part of it. But anyway, I had this spiritual awakening. And from then, and I went from living in London to within weeks, we're talking this happened in about 3 or 4 weeks, living in London to coming back, living up north. I stayed with family for a bit and then I'd get my own place and then stepping into the spiritualist church and being like, I need to sort out my head. Because like I say, suddenly I realized I just had this clarity on how messy my head was. And that's all I can describe it as. It was like I'd made this connection with God. I call it God, spirit, that I had been ignoring, that I had stifled for a long time. And that was 12 years ago now. So since then, I've followed that thread. I've followed the guidance. I've followed the lessons. I've followed all the learning I've been guided towards for 12 years now. And I live in a different world than I did then. My life now is nothing like it was then. I am a different person. I might be in the same body and I still have the same like essence, the same soul, if you like. But the version of me, some people call ego and stuff, the version of me that was living then is not the version of me that's living now. My life is different. The way I see the world is different. The way I cope with experiences, how I can emotionally process, how I can communicate, my physical health, the way I think. Do you know what I mean? It's like everything is completely different. And the only way it is because I went through this process where I committed to this process of following a spiritual path, becoming a conscious creator, choosing to consciously change my life, to consciously create something different. Because what I was doing before was just going along and going along and going along and going along and going along, not stopping, not thinking, not considering, not considering any possible outcomes. And I was striving for like this, I guess, ideal future, but it was just causing us like, let's say, stress and repressed anxiety and all sorts of health problems that I wasn't even aware of. So for me, like the mental health part of it, that I kind of get a